Hey, welcome to Leadership Within, the moment for leaders to reflect on their human experience of leadership. I'm your host, TK, and I'm joined by
Vanessa.
Hey, Vanessa. What I find interesting is we're now at the start of February as we're releasing it. And, just to start our conversation, as it's great to see you as always, how would you describe your January?
I think my January has been quite an insightful one, but it's been quite a heavy lifting one, if that makes any sense. So I found it long, and I found that that we've had a lot of grey cloud here in the UK, and I have to really focus my mindset to really notice joy and small things. Long. Is the short
Long
answer.
indeed, right? Even though we just had a long December, now it's the January. It's true. When, the weather outside isn't necessarily joyful, finding the joy within is sometimes takes an effort.
Yeah, and I think that's the learning in it, isn't it? It's like, oh, can I do that?
Well, I've seen a lot of your wonderful posts. Dear listeners, if you're not following Vanessa, you definitely should on LinkedIn. It's also been quite long for me. I've, started something new and I've promised myself I will hustle. And so I did. But I'm happy to move on into February with some reflection. And, dear listeners, this might also be a good opportunity for you because this is what we want to do today in our episode, which is ask ourselves, what happens when our goals, many people go through this New Year's resolution cycle where, they have goals over Christmas. And around this time, around the start of February, the reality starts to bite. Not everything necessarily is achievable. Gyms are getting to the normal levels of occupancy again. And, well, I've definitely observed that. So I'm wondering, Vanessa, what's your perspective? Why do you think, in terms of people, our listeners, or, your own experience, leaders, clients, do you think people actually manage to reach these New Year's resolution most of the time?
Well, I think it's also an assumption that everyone's setting them because I didn't set them. True. It's funny because listening to you and you saying the gyms are kind of, like getting less busy, I kind of think, thank goodness.
Good point. Yeah, I always hate January. Yeah.
Oh, I hate working out when it's just like someone's waiting for the machine or whatever. So for me, it's quite nice to feel that spaciousness as people start to filter out. So I'm not answering your question. Remind me of your question again.
Well, you've maybe answered it a bit in terms of your perspective on the whole phenomenon of New Year's resolutions, right? And, us as coaches, what happens, at least for me, is I definitely get, similar to the gyms, an influx of clients or clients coming back in January because they want to change things in their lives, assign themselves goals and objectives, and then they come back around this time when the reality starts to bite. And my experience is it does for many people, and yet they go through this cycle again and again. And I know that I'm also not setting goals for myself, to be honest, in terms of every year. But I was wondering, what's your perspective? Do you feel it serves people to do that?
So I can't. I'm not going to speak for other people. It doesn't serve me to do that. So I think, we're patterned creatures, aren't we? And indeed. I think you asked me how my January was, and my January has been noticing patterns in my business, patterns in the way I show up for things. And the old cycle for me would be to get really caught up in this hustle to set goals and somehow, change myself for a better version. And, I now kind of feel like, one, the timing of that isn't great. January, we're meant to be hibernating. And then two, I kind of feel like that just plays into this whole anxiety and pressure that I can feel to, keep improving and pushing. And that then leads me to, kind of falling over because I haven't necessarily been very good at sustaining effort over time. So for me, I think that the older I get, the more I learn to, who am I and what helps me work best, and sustainable marginal change, having, like an overarching vision, but being able to look back to where was I last month, the month before? Have I moved forward in terms of that, rather than this ideal of, if I could just get this, really fit body, for example, and it's all going to be great. It's like, no, that's just another perfected ideal. And it's kind of interesting because, well, it may not be interesting to you, but it's interesting to me. The older you get as a woman, so women tend to put weight on around their middle. And what's really interesting is when you start to research this, actually doing all that really hard pushing stuff, creates more cortisol, and then you're going to hold it more on your middle. So, it's almost like I feel like there are all these signals that kind of say, not sure that's the right way. And so for me, it's how do I set myself up for success and know my own rhythms and work to that, rather than tune into this thing that is out there in the world, which says New Year's resolutions, change yourself, get better, whatever.
Beach body.
Oh my God, I've never had one of those.
Neither have I, right? Because it's like, having said that, it's actually, no, I totally appreciate your perspective. And I think, I wish sometimes that I could possibly get to this balance myself. Although obviously it requires you to give yourself the permission to do that, right? Which is difficult for many, might be difficult for me, and it's probably difficult for many of my clients. And what I find is it's even more difficult when you're in this position of leadership. When it's interesting always when you think about, companies bringing senior executives, or even if you look at like middle tier leaders, even line managers, people are looking up to them to have the vision, to have these big goals. Even though you're right, it's not always sustainable, right? We've created this cycle of constantly pushing, constantly renewing. But it's interesting, Vanessa, at least to me, that this is something that is a part of a role of a leader. So what I find interesting here is it something that can be harmonized and connected? On one hand, the perspective of sustainability and finding what's best for you, maybe for your organization. On the other, this constant drive by our rampant 21st century capitalism of pushing and renewing, right? How do you balance all of it?
Well, and I think I'm not sure I have any answers. But I do think something I've been noticing in my clients, particularly those ones that are in really senior leadership positions where they feel like it's all on them. And there'll be this really, I want to say lofty, but dreamy kind of vision. Like, we're going to be this kind of organization and we're going to do these kind of behaviors together. But the reality is we're quite away from that right now. So we all sign up to, for example, a human-centric way of being. And what I notice it in them, and I also notice it in my own business, is this: it's one thing to want to build a legacy and to want to have a vision. And it's another to really scale that down and hold the tension between where we are and where we need to get to, and be reinforcing, renewing, encouraging as we set out towards that ambition. And I think what I notice is that it's a lot of stress for senior leaders when they're holding, gosh, we should be here and we're way off. And, it can feel like it's all on them. And, I really think that, how we are with ourselves towards walking to something that we want, but we don't yet have, is so important.
It is. I agree with you. Although my observation is working with these leaders myself and, seeing leadership groups, the interesting thing is obviously because a job of a senior leader quite often brings this demand of setting these maybe sometimes unrealistic expectations that people that get promoted and hired for these roles are possibly going through a natural selection of, it's easier to get promoted, get to these positions, being able to speak about these big targets and not necessarily as much when it comes to sustainability versus, making sure that, as you say, you are having a more reasonable journey. So I'm just wondering, like, from your perspective, and how do you see people that are in these positions of leadership succeeding with this approach? How can you get ahead, get to these positions and succeed in them while still maybe navigating the fact that you're not setting these unrealistic goals and constantly chasing it? What is it that they can do? What do you see them doing to succeed?
Yeah, I kind of want to throw that back at you because I think what I see in you is I see, and it's really been quite interesting in our conversations, like you really have an agile perspective around setbacks. And I think, you've probably got the answer to this more than I have, in that I think you're able to, move towards something and then pivot because of the environment that you've been in for, a long time. And I'm not, I think that's quite a gift that you have. And I think not everybody was, kind of educated in that way. So for some people, we have, and I would include me in that, we have to learn how to be flexible and agile with, that didn't quite work. So let go of that piece and learn from it and move and adapt. I think sometimes we can be quite fixed in what we're moving towards. So yeah, back to you.
Okay. Well, thank you for the appreciation there. It's sometimes easy to take something for granted. It's not that it's always bringing me success, but it actually leads to maybe a challenge that I face with this approach. So, okay, back to me then, and back to a personal story. When I was running a business with a couple of business partners, a couple of years ago, we've decided to hire a marketing agency. Searching for answers, searching for something that would help us in this wonderful world of trying to get more business. And we thought, well, that's, enough is enough. We are not able to market ourselves. So we've earned some money, so might as well invest in some expertise. And as we were interviewed at the start of this marketing journey, the wonderful owner of this agency, a very creative person that I respect a lot, he has asked me a question that I've never been asked before. And I guess, we could also qualify it as a coaching question. And he used the term that I've also never heard before, which is a BHAG. And he explained it as a big, hairy, audacious goal. And as he asked about this, at the end of this, long briefing session, when he was trying to understand who we are and what we want to do, myself and my business partner really struggled with it. I personally really struggled with it because despite being, maybe creative sometimes or having my famed Eastern European imagination and fantasy, I didn't have one. Neither do I have one now. And you know what? I felt like there's something wrong with me. I felt like maybe I'm missing out. Maybe people are supposed to have these big, hairy, audacious goals. Like, what the hell? Am I running a business? And I don't have any of these, right? So what I thought, it's like, and by the fact that he was asking this question, I thought, well, oh my God, right? I'm missing out on something. And I'm wondering, do you find people actually having these magical statements on walls, these patterns of where they want to get to, whatever you call it, the big, hairy, audacious goal was the one I remember.
Yeah, I totally do. And I think it's, I think it's really natural in a way, like, I'm dissatisfied with where I am and I want to be here. So I know the end state of where I want to be, but actually, have I really done the raft to work out what are the steps that are going to take me to where I want to get to? And I think it is magical thinking. Like, I can have that magical thinking. Someone said to me, I've been in this, it's now finished, but I've been in this trauma-based business building program. And he said, he did this vision, like meditation. And, it was kind of like, okay, what would you like? And then double it, and then double it, and double it, and double it, right? And of course it's numbers. And afterwards he was talking to us and he was saying, where did yours get up to? And I said, I'd love to make 1 million. I've never thought about myself in that category. And so therefore it was like an identity piece. But one of the things that, I've learned through being in that program, but also witnessing other, entrepreneurs, solopreneurs in that program, is that everybody has got these big numeric goals for what they want to achieve. And they often also, in our field, we've also got impact goals. Like, I really want to have this kind of legacy. Me really want to support women rising, really want to support girls, all that kind of stuff. But actually, and he will always say it's entitlement. If you don't, if you think, wow, I'm going to do all this stuff, but it's not going to be sucky hard graft. He said there's no point being focused on the legacy if you haven't got the pipeline sorted, the sales sorted, and I think it's been, when I said to you, January's been that kind of month for me, really looking at, okay, what have been my patterns of magical thinking? I want the beach body, whatever. And like, okay, what is actually realistic for where I am? And how can I hold myself more compassionately and gently, look back at where I was previously, and compare that way rather than comparing out with people that I might see looking shiny and amazing and thinking they've all got their shit together, and stay on my track. I often think if I was a racehorse, I'd need blinkers on there because, I can get quite anxious, and kind of like thinking, oh, I'm not far enough ahead. And so to bring that back to leaders, that's something that I do see in leadership is like a fear, so a vision set out of fear. Oh, we need to be here because we're really, AI is coming, different things. Oh my God, I'm really scared. And then it kind of creates this stress in the organization where we don't necessarily do our best work. Then you have layoffs and different things. Do you know what I mean? To try, and it's all reactive, fear-based, rather than, okay, how do we hold, this vision that we know is years out there, and how do we hold ourselves accountable for the way that we're going to show up towards that? I think there's, too much magical thinking out there, and entitlement. And I say that with full, humanity, because I know that I've had to really look at mine and think, God, I'm really credentialed. I've got, X amount of experience. Why can't I have A, B, C? It's not fair.
But, it's interesting. I'm reflecting a lot on what you said, right? And what I'm hearing is this graft. And, I've spoke with one of my clients recently, and focusing on the how, right? Focusing on getting it, as you've called the pipeline, getting your docket together. But the interesting thing here that you've mentioned is entitlement, right? That's. I would like to explore it a bit further because it's an interesting word. Because obviously, Vanessa, let's be honest, you have worked quite hard for all of your credentials, all of your experience, all of the wonderful things you did in your life. And isn't it fair to feel like it should be valued? Is it entitlement, though? I mean...
Right. The language gives us something, doesn't it? Should.
Yeah.
It should be. Against whose law, right? Against whose rule? And I think for me, so it's how do I do the work to be consistent? Because my personality is one where I like starting things up and then moving on. I get bored quick. My brain goes in different directions, So how do I, for me, entitlement is, well, I've put all this energy and this work into this.
You did. Yeah.
And now I'm going to pivot because I don't want to do the graph to consistently, slowly build, and stay talking about the same thing. I'm going to keep changing my mind. I'm going to keep changing my model, rather than realize. So one of the things that I've been doing is looking, particularly like with social media, looking at actually how long does it take people to really build community? And it doesn't, I think so many of us are looking for these magic bullets.
Oh, absolutely.
Including, it's like, because I just want relief from this is hard. So one of the things that I'm trying to do is notice my capacity. Like, okay, I'm tired today. How much available energy do I have? And what's the commitment that I've got to myself? So if someone was setting a goal around weight loss or whatever that is, can I make a commitment that I'm going to move each day? And it doesn't have to be me going to a gym, but I'm going to move my body. I'm going to move my energy. I think it's just, that's what I'm realizing is like, rather than seeing that as a chore, actually that's like kind of me paying my dues. I'm not going to get anywhere if I do the pattern that I've often done, which is I'll get right to the edge. I'll build a brand. I'll get right to the edge and then I'll go, oh, not working, change. And I see that in organizations too, right? It's like, oh, we're going to set a plan. We're going to get close and it's going to get tricky. And then we're going to pivot and we're going to change. But it's like, will you change? Like for the sake of what?
Yeah. Oh, that's, there's so much to unpack in what you've said. Maybe, and I would love to get to a lot of the stuff that I've heard from you, but maybe what's interesting for me to start with, and I think you've ended with this, is what I find, and maybe for you listeners, this could be one of the takeaways from this wonderful episode, which is I often ask when it comes to either personal coaching or when I'm coaching individual or groups of leaders, two questions depending on what's the context, to maybe replace this big goal, right? You've mentioned numerical money. In fact, what I find very helpful, even for myself, to be honest, is what is the life that you want to design for yourself? What is the life that you want to live? And then we can focus on what are the actions you're doing now that support that. And for the organizational context is, what is the company? What is the organization you want this to be? Right? Think about this state. You don't have to call it numbers. You can use any metaphor you like, which will hopefully guide you to what's important for you, either individually or as someone that has the vision for the entire organization. But the interesting thing you've mentioned is this pivoting, this interesting, like, okay, well, the creativity at the start of visioning, of setting this is exciting, is joyful. Not the graft, the hustle, the, as I call it, using the elbow grease to squeeze people through my funnels into my pipeline. That's my new term that I use quite often, and I'm doing that. Is not necessarily joyful for many people. So that's a big thing that you're right. I'm reflecting on how, you've inspired me to think that many people pivot because of, right, I need to pull up my sleeves and get cracking on this. And it might be easier to get my joy from dreaming again, right? Which is fun,
Right.
which is what's needed, right? But that's important too. But I love the fact that you've talked about these, the way to deal with this, which is focus on the short milestones and focus on, reflecting and seeing what it does. And we spoke about it last time in terms of making sure you're not pivoting enough, but you stay on track. But again, the interesting thing is, where do you get the data? Is it just numbers, or is it looking at other people? Is it getting a coach? How would you recommend doing that? Or maybe what's your approach, Vanessa?
Well, so as you're talking, I'm thinking back to all the times when I was working in organizations, and we would get in some external facilitators to facilitate the team. And often it would then be around, are we aligned around the same purpose, blah, 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 blah. And so you would have this amazing experience, and you would all dream something up, and that would be it. And and then everyone would get frustrated again because we weren't, and I think so I feel that we probably have preferences. Do we have preferences for results? Do we have preferences for relationship? I'm highly relational, so I've got a preference for that. And what I'm learning is that the two absolutely need to sit together. And so being highly relational but with no achievement aspect to it is really not helpful. And I think if I was to be back inside those organizations, contracting with people to bring in development solutions, what I would be far more interested, rather than how do we set yet another vision, I would be much more interested in exploring, okay, so what happens to us together as we walk towards something, and then, what happens that makes it hard for us to deliver on that, so that we actually get learning from what's gone before that we can then pull into the future. And I think too often I see, and hey, I facilitate these things, so,
that's what we do, yeah.
Too often it's like, we want to do something, a really nice retreat, or we want to go somewhere great, and we want to have this great experience away from the office and da-da-da. But it's like, okay, and that's really useful. But for me, I think the older I get, the more I think, actually, that whole thing of holding the mirror up to the system and saying, wow, how do we do things? And is that really working for us to get where we want to get in a sustainable way that also lives our values? I think that's much more of the gritty work that I would want to be seeing happening in organizations than, in my experience, I have previously, lacked involvement in. It's been much more, let's do the revisioning and the strategy and so for me, it's just strategy without a plan and without awareness of what takes us out of our plan. It is kind of magical thinking.
I get it. But it's so serendipitous and wonderful to hear you talking about that. As a person that's, I'm not saying the opposite, but definitely I've been brought in a lot of times to deal with the processes, the ways of work, the thinking there, and the way that results flow, the way that goals get set. And as you said, it's just such an important thing to balance the focus on relationship and the focus on results. Myself, maybe being focused on results and numbers for way too long. So I'm glad to have met people like you on my journey to help me balance myself a bit more. But the interesting thing is, and I'm guessing that focusing on relationship definitely does provide the same perspective. One of the ways that I've seen people and organizations motivate themselves, and it's a bit harder for the organizations, but I'll talk about that, to motivate themselves to this particular grind is to get joy from achieving small wins. I mean, I'm not saying anything that's, groundbreaking or anything, but, even personally, when I think about that, even like the feeling of hunger in my mind can sometimes be replaced with, oh yeah, this is how getting in shape feels like. It's not hunger, it's something else. Or seeing like, this is why I bought a Bluetooth scale to be able to see the graph if it goes in the right direction. And this is why I have my cycling computer to see my watts go up and whatnot, right? The joy that you're getting from achieving these small wins, if they're measurable, it's actually quite great. But what's in the organizational context, it obviously requires celebration, obviously requires communicating it, right? That, my God, this quarter goes better and this is what we've achieved and we're proud of ourselves, to ourselves, which is important, acknowledging it. But when you think about the relationship aspect of it all, what's the analogy there? What's the relationship way of acknowledging these wins?
Yeah, I mean, I think you said it. It's celebration. And I think, if we assume most of us are wired for the negative bias, so we're looking for where are we off the target. And I think, if we go right back to where we started, which is New Year's resolutions,
yes.
Are we focusing on what we haven't done or what we have done? Are we looking for the small wins and going, yay, out of 31 days, I showed up at the gym, 10 times or whatever it is. Or are we going, oh, I didn't do the other, 21 times or 20 times. And I think for me, it's that piece. It's like often we don't, start meetings with celebration. Like, what's something we're celebrating today? And it feels really weird when you start doing it. It's like, oh, this is really fake. But actually, it really does put your attention on what you're appreciating, what's working, and I think if we can notice those marginal things, it gives us that so much more, energy, impetus to move things forward and to keep going and to grit, than if we're kind of going, which most of us are doing, is like giving ourselves a really hard time. I haven't delivered on that, or I haven't done that. There's still that on my list. It's like, hey, hun, you're going to die with a list. Like, let's just face it.
Oh, it's a big one. And, knowing that you don't spend so much time on social media, and I would say that, this is something I actually talked about this week, which is, my question is, what are you proud of? Right? What are you proud of achieving? And there's a story associated with it when I had some person really being surprised by me saying that and pushing back, and how they embraced it and used it for themselves as a leader going forward. And years after that, they thanked me for this question that I'm not saying has changed their life, but definitely has impacted them. Because I stuck with it, right? I said, no, I know that feels like we're in a kindergarten situation, but I really mean it. I think we should be proud of what we've achieved, and I would love us to acknowledge it. And many people, as you say, struggle with that.
Well, and isn't that fascinating, right? It's like often when we ask people, what are the emotions that you can't be with? It'll be like, oh, I can't be with anger, or I can't be, do you know what I mean? Like, really, we'll go to that side of, can't be with conflict. I know it's not an emotion, but, and it's like, actually, I think pride is one of the ones that actually for a lot of people is quite challenging. I think for particularly women, it's challenging. And I think that like actually, when you compliment someone and they go, oh, no, like, oh, that dress looks great. And they go, oh no, it's only from Asda. Like, oh, I've had it years. It's like, oh my God, we need to really own, like, oh, thank you. And I think I love what you're saying about pride. I think it's it's an important emotion that actually I think often can get marginalized.
Yes, that's true. And again, now maybe going full circle, I'm reflecting on my January, right? So I'd like to maybe, as we're wrapping this wonderful episode to a close, ask ourselves this question, right? You've mentioned pride. So What is it that you're proud of, Vanessa, when it comes to your January?
I am really proud that I found joy every single day in tiny things that cost nothing. I'm really proud of that. How about you?
A moment of silence that I will not edit out. I'm proud to have proven to myself that I've got what it takes. Despite the hardship, that I can push, I can get my elbows out, and I can, even to the boundary of burnout and unsustainability, I can fight for the life I want to have. I thought it might be difficult, and it is difficult, but I'm proud that I managed and that I can continue. So
Great
different
job.
between you and I. And, I'm envious of, what you said. And maybe what I think needed is, let's leave this question to our wonderful listeners so they can reflect on what they're proud about for the month that just passed. And we'll be back with you soon, dear listeners. Hope you've enjoyed this episode. And again, thank you so much for this conversation, Vanessa.
Thank you.